Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be taking a snapshot of the opening of one of Beethoven's most famous middle period piano sonatas, his Opus 53, the Waldstein Sonata, written in 1804 and dedicated to one of his friends and patrons, Count Waldstein, hence the title. And in particular, we're just going to kind of zoom in, if you like, on a couple of aspects. This sonata has an amazingly kind of dramatic opening. And how does Beethoven achieve that? And that might help us to appreciate something about his style, how he creates drama. We're going to look at that particularly through two windows, if you like. And also for those of you who are writing your own music, well, what happens if you want to create a bit of drama in the way you're writing? Are these two things we're going to look at of any interest to you, an idea that you could work with? And I'm going to suggest that there are two things that Beethoven does in the opening statements of his Waldstein Sonata and the first movement that generate an unbelievable amount of drama and energy. One of the issues is rhythm. And the other issue is how quickly he modulates through keys. Sometimes keys that are not a million miles away from where he's starting, but we're ducking and diving through these keys. So you get this whole kind of kaleidoscope of modulation, which is really kind of focused on small numbers of bars at a time. So we never know quite where we're going next, and the music darts from this key to that key to another key, and that keeps the excitement going alongside a lot of rhythmic energy. The rhythmic energy is generated in part by repeated quavers or eighth notes, and also in part by lots of semiquavers or 16th notes that are either kind of running around melodically or they're kind of sort of tremolo kind of effects, you know, alternating notes very quickly in 16th notes or in semiquavers. So just to get an idea what we're talking about, let's just have a listen to the opening of this. And as you're listening to it, think about those two aspects. What's Beethoven doing with the rhythm? What's he doing with the modulation, with the key change? How does that kind of combine to create this drama, this allegro con brio that he asked for at the beginning, so fast with life? And so it goes on. Okay, well, that's just there to give you an idea of what's going on. And immediately you're kind of seized by the energy of this, aren't you? Which is almost compounded at the beginning by the low dynamics. You know, if you're going to kind of generate a lot of drama and energy, the first thing you might think to do as the composer is to have a lot of loud music. You know, you might be thinking, I want drama and energy. And let's have some fantastic, loud, big, fat chords. Beethoven says, well, that's what you might be expecting. I'm going to start PP, pianissimo, very quiet. Oh, that's a bit of a surprise, isn't it? And he starts off with a chord of C major. So when you hear the first chord, you think, well, there's nothing terribly exciting about this. It's a sonata in C major, and the first thing we hear is a chord of C major. Okay, well, what does he do with that chord of C major? Well, he sits there for the first 7 beats of the piece. So we could have written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, by that time, we would all have lost interest in this piece, wouldn't we? A C major chord that goes on for 7 beats before anything else happens. There's no melody. There's nothing else happening. So how does Beethoven get away with this C major chord for 7 beats? He does something very simple. He repeats it. But by repeating it in quavers or eighth notes at a decent speed, it has this huge amount of kind of pent up energy. So you're immediately kind of on edge of your seat, aren't you? Thinking, oh, what's going on now? And then just at the point where you think, okay, got it, C major chord, we've got all these repeated quavers or eighth notes. The first thing he does from that C major is not to use another chord that helps to establish C major. He says, okay, you've had a chord of C major, that's your lot for C major, we're immediately off to another key. Now, that's a fairly crazy idea, isn't it? You know, I mean, if I'd thought to write the Waldstein Sonata and I'd had this idea of starting with this repeated C major chord, I'd be thinking, well, the first thing we need to do is to have a cadence in C major. I'd be quite happy if I'd written that. You know, there's the opening of my Sonata in C major. Does Beethoven do that? Does he? Heck. He starts with C major, and then at the end of the second bar, you suddenly think, there's an F sharp in there. And he's modulating over this bar line to G major. So he uses this opening chord of C major. He then has this chord. So this chord is a dominant seventh in its last inversion in G major. And then as soon as he goes to the next bar, he resolves that to a tonic chord of G major. So you think, oh, okay, well, all we had was a chord of C major. We never did anything else to establish the key of C major before we set off. So we have this combined energy of the first three bars, the first three measures. Well, we have what looks boring, like a chord of C major for 7 beats. But those repeated quavers just put you on the edge of your seat with excitement. And then we immediately modulate to G major. Oh, we're in G major and we've only just begun. Goodness me, what's going on now? So then you think, okay, I'm beginning to get my head around this because the next bar is also a G major chord. So we're thinking, oh, great, okay, so here's G major. So, well, if that were you writing, what would you do? Well, you might carry on in G major. And have a bit of G major. You could do that, or you might say, well, I've got a chord of G major, but in fact, I'm going to call that the dominant chord of C major. So even though I didn't do the C major thing at the beginning, I've had a little flick into G major, maybe treating it as a secondary dominant into G major, but then I'll come back to C major. Now I'm home in C major again. I mean, any self-respecting composer would have done it something like that. Is that how Beethoven does it? So what we get this modulation to G major. So we started with the C major thing, then we went to G major in the third bar, and we stayed there in the fourth bar. And then what does he do? In the next bar, he does this. And suddenly we're looking at a chord of B flat major. Now, how do we get to B flat major? I thought we were in C major and then you suddenly got shot into G major. We're either going to stay in G major or go back to C major, and Beethoven goes, well, let's have a chord of B flat major. So now you're getting over the shock of, well, how on earth are we in B flat major? And of course the answer is, we're not. But we are using a chord of B flat major. So then what he does here is he reruns the opening in sequence, because if you look at this handful of bars or measures going on into this one, you think actually he's reliving these first four and we're just using that sequentially. And what he does is he drops the whole thing by a tone. So we get this, we had C major at the beginning, now we've got B flat major from here, but what happens? We get B flat major for 7 beats again, then he goes 570 in F major, then 1 in F major. Okay, beginning to get it, because we started at the beginning, we had chord 1 in C major, which by the way is chord 4 in G major. Then he went 5-1 in G major. Okay, now we've got B flat major. Well, it is chord 1 in B flat major, but of course it's chord 4 in F major. Then he goes 5, 1 in F major. Okay, getting the idea. So what happened at the beginning? We were in C major, and then we went dominant 7th to 1 in G major, stuck with a G major chord. Okay, here's our shock, B flat major, but it's the same thing in sequence, going to 5, 7, last inversion in F major to the tonic of F major. So he's going to do what he did before, and he's going to do this little thing in F major, because that's what he did last time. Does he do that in this bar this time? No. Instead of doing it in F major, which is kind of what would fit with the previous version, he says, well, it's the same, but this time we'll do it in F minor. So you see how that then suddenly changes the scene a little bit, doesn't it? And enhances the drama. So we've got this kind of ongoing repeated quaver thing. It's like a kind of musical machine gun fire of quavers. Da, 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 da. You know, it could have been a theme music for a James Bond film, couldn't it, really? So we've got all this machine gun fire quavers going on, but then we've got this kind of madness with the chords and the keys, but then we're just beginning to get our heads around the fact that by the time we get to here, we're rerunning the opening in sequence, and then just as we think this is going to be an F major, Beethoven says, let's have an F minor chord, why don't we? So, oh, right, okay. Well, how does all this fit with anything? Well, where does he go from there? Well, when it comes to the next bar, we have this. Well, this is basically a dominant 7th in the key of C. Now then, how does that relate to this F minor? Well, a chord of F minor is a borrowed 4 in relation to the key of C. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in C major, chord 4 is F, A, C. But if we borrow a chord from the parallel minor, 4 in C minor is F, A flat C. So that is a chord of F minor. So do you see what he's done in this bar? He's borrowed 4 from the parallel minor. And then he says, well, here's chord 5, 7. It's a bit kind of short on notes, if we're honest. We've got the bottom and the top of a 5, 7 with the top doubled up there, but we haven't got a third or a fifth of that chord, so it's a bit empty, but there's nothing else it can be. It's a 5, 7, and then he kind of comes back to this F minor thing again, back to this 5, 7, back to the F minor, back to the 5, 7, back to the F minor, back to the 5, 7, 5, 7, and then he comes down a scale of C minor, and then an arpeggio of C minor. So at the end of all that, we've had our 5, 7 that he keeps reiterating, alternating with this borrowed 4. And then when he comes out of it, he delivers a scale of C, not C major, but C minor, and then comes down this arpeggio of C minor with a decrescendo with these quavers and quaver rests. Sounds like something off the silent movies, doesn't it? You know, the villain kind of creeping around the place with these low dynamics again. And so now we're in C minor. So my goodness, look what we've done since the beginning of the piece. We've had this highly energetic rhythm coming through these repeated quavers or eighth notes. We've had these fast things delivered in the right hand, these semiquavers, 16th notes, scale runs and so on. We've borrowed a chord from the parallel minor. Then we've ended up in C minor instead of C major. And then we get to this moment and Beethoven draws breath. He says, well, we've had so much dramatic energetic stuff going on, let's just pause for thought on this note. Okay, well, we know we're in C minor and this G is the dominant note of C minor, so all is well. We're all set for a nice little tune in C minor. So if it was you or me, we'd have a little tune in C minor, and we'd be happy bunnies. Well, he comes down in C minor, and then what does he do? As he comes out of that pause, he goes, well, you think it's C minor, but after all, this is a Waldstein sonata in the key of C major. So he goes back to C major. And you get C major again. And then what does he do? He repeats the harmonic pattern of the opening, but now we've got faster rhythm, as if those quavers, those eighth notes weren't fast enough. Now we've got 16th notes, we've got the semiquavers, still with a PP. It's a kind of sort of pent up energy, isn't it? But he's using the same pattern, because do you notice we've got 7 beats of C major, then dominant 7th in G major, going to the tonic chord of G major, just as he did at the beginning. Then this bar, this measure, where he copied it. So these 4 bars here are exactly these 4 bars here, but it's just the rhythms become even more exciting. So by the time we get to the end of this, we think, oh, we know what he's going to do. He's going to carry on doing this stuff, but using that B flat major chord. So now he's going to go. You're going to have all that stuff again. Does he do that? So when we get to this point, we're in this G major thing that we had up here, but then instead of going on to this B flat major chord that leads us into F major, he says, well, actually, you know what? The relative key of F major is D minor. Let's have a chord of D minor. So then he goes into D minor chord. You're thinking, why are we in D minor? Then he says, well, because you're not. Because he gives us 7 beats of a D minor chord, and then says, well, you think that's the tonic chord of D minor, maybe because you heard F major up here and D minor is a relative minor, that makes sense. Actually, the chord of D minor is also chord 4 in the key of A minor. So 7 beats of the tonic chord of D minor, but in fact, it's the subdominant chord of A minor, because then it goes 5/7 last inversion to 1 in A minor. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, A minor. And you think, oh, what are we doing in A minor? Okay, well, A minor is the relative of C major, the home key, so it's fine. So, you know, he carries on at the beginning of the next page. Yeah, that's fine. That's a nice A minor chord. So now we know what we're going to do. We're in A minor, and then we're going to have a cadence in A minor. And we'll be happy in A minor for a while. Is that what happens? Well, you've guessed it. There's A minor. And then he does this. And you're thinking, what are you doing, Ludwig? We had an A minor, and then suddenly A sharp has crept into the equation. Well, how did that happen? How did we get that A minor to have an A sharp in it? Well, of course, if you have a think about this chord, this is an augmented 6th chord, but even though it's an augmented 6th chord, a chromatic chord, so that A sharp's a bit of a surprise, it's not actually in the key of A minor. It's actually in the key of E. Could be E minor, could be E major. So you're sort of thinking, why? It's supposed to be in C major, this thing. Well, so we get this augmented 6th chord, which has loaded itself, and then it goes into this complete mad run of semiquavers or 16th notes, because that resolves to a chord of B major. So then you're thinking, oh, are we in B major? And Beethoven goes, well, you might think that. But in fact, that B major chord is the dominant chord of E minor, because this is all chord 5 in E minor, and then we go to 1 in E minor. 5/7 in E minor, back to 1 in E minor. 5/7, back to 1, 5/7, back to 1, 5/7, 5/7, 1, 5/7, 1, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. A bit of elaboration around all that, and eventually we get to 1 in E major. So now he goes into this mad thing using semiquavers, this very fast rhythm, but kind of bouncing back and forth between these 2 chords. It's kind of like a battle, a duel between the dominant and the tonic chord. When we go from here, we've got that oscillation back and forth, sort of really reinforcing E minor all the way, isn't it? So by the time we get to the end of this mad rush of 16th notes and semiquavers and fast alternation between these 2 chords, we're going to have a nice big cadence in E minor, and we're all going to think, I'm not quite sure what we're doing in E minor, but at least we've made it. What does Beethoven do? Comes to the end of all this and then gives us a lovely chord of E major. So from there you get something like this. Alternating these 2 chords, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant. All this is dominant and straight down, and then a load of jumping octaves, all outlining this. And we're waiting for our modulation to E minor, E major, and takes us by surprise. Well, we could go on because the whole Waldstein Sonata is just full of this stuff. And it's absolutely fascinating. But do you see how he keeps the listener absolutely on the edge of our seats with all this amazingly energetic rhythm that's going on? Repeated notes, fast moving 16th notes or semiquavers. And then this mad scheme of modulation that uses sequence that leads us up the garden path. So we think, I know what he's going to do. And then he just goes whoop and nips off somewhere else and takes us by surprise. And then he has this huge build up of expectation of E minor and then says, dolce, molto legato, very understated piano. Here's a chord of E major. And then on we go to the next bit. Fascinating sonata, fascinating composer, a huge amount to teach us who are lesser mortals when it comes to the field of composition. So I hope you found that absolutely fascinating and something that gives you food for thought. And if you've enjoyed this video, you might like to go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk, where you can find a course with an analysis of one of Beethoven's sonatas, the complete every single movement of the Beethoven Pathetique Sonata that will take you through every note, every chord, show you exactly what's going on there. Lots of other courses that you might find helpful, and have a look at Maestros while you're there. It's our global community of musicians, and when you see what's on offer there, you might well want to join us. It's a very exciting group. So lots of resources on the website that you might find are very helpful in empowering you as an all-round musician.